Michigan, where we can see a plane, of course, that looks like Air Force One. It is a member of the presidential fleet, but it's only designated Air Force One when the president is on board. But they did designate one of the two 747s, these blue tops, which carry the president, to carry former President Gerald Ford, his family. Also, former President Carter is said to be on board as well, as they land in Grand Rapids, Michigan, there for the sixth day. Well, today will be the fifth day. He is, of course, going to lie in repose tonight at the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Museum, and then there will be another and final service tomorrow where he will be laid to rest. And at that final service, of course, Gerald Ford will be memorialized by former President Carter. And it was Carter who, of course, defeated Jerry Ford, but they became very close friends after leaving office. And so it was President Carter who was asked by President Ford to do this final eulogy and what is going to be a more personal final memorial and final farewell to our 38th president, President Gerald R. Ford. And you can see their touchdown in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We want to go now to Janet Shamlin, who is there in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Janet, tell us what we can expect today and tomorrow.
Well, Nora, to follow up on what you were saying, a lot of what we can expect is a more personal, a more neighborly tribute to the 38th President of the United States. The honorary pallbearer list, for example, for the Grand Rapids service at Grace Episcopal Church tomorrow contains names that will be known here in Grand Rapids and throughout the state of Michigan, business leaders, people who President Ford befriended, but not necessarily national names or politicians. As you said, former President Jimmy Ford will be eulogizing President Ford, but they had grown very close in the past few decades. There will be a lot greater involvement by the family. 3 of the Ford grandchildren will be offering prayers. 2 of President Ford's sons will be speaking. The tribute is more geared towards his life here in Michigan. He served more than 25 years in Congress, and a lot of people are lining up now, coming to the museum. Never met him, but watched him rise politically. So I think what you're going to see here over the next 24 hours is really reflective of the man and not the office that he held. There will be services at the airport shortly. As you just saw, the aircraft carrying the casket of President Ford has landed. Then they will come here to the Gerald R. Ford Museum, where there will be another service. At that point, we'll see the president of 2 of President Ford's alma maters, Yale University, where he attended law school, and the University of Michigan. Those folks will present wreaths at the casket inside the museum. Then it will be open to the public at 5 o'clock, and the president's casket will lie in repose through the night. And they are expecting big crowds. They've got a whole system set up here. They expect a lot of folks to come from throughout the region. We talked to a woman who drove in from Chicago and wanted to pay her respects. So this will be a more neighborly or community tribute, if you will, still with a touch of national politics in it. We'll see Donald Rumsfeld as one of the eulogizers at the service at Grace Episcopal Church tomorrow. But for the most part, the tenor will change from what we saw in Washington today. Nora?
And Janet, of course, you noted Jerry Ford, a Nebraska native, but of course served in Congress for 25 years from Grand Rapids, Michigan. So that is his home, where he returns, where his presidential museum is. And as you noted, he will be returning to lie in repose at the presidential museum now for what is 8 hours of public visitation, stretching throughout the night before his internment on Wednesday afternoon. Jen, and I know you have been there for several days. Just sort of some color, if you could share with us. Have there been a lot of visitors to the museum and a lot expected to visit Gerald Ford's remains there at the museum tonight?
They're expecting large crowds. And talking to some of the people who worked at the museum, which opened in 1981, Gerald Ford was very present in terms of the planning for this event. For example, the place of his interment tomorrow is just outside this museum. It is a spot under a modest tree, as it's described, that he selected, with space left next to it. for the eventual burial of his wife. He chose everything from the picket fence that will surround that interment spot to the place where it's located. Every part of this planning he was involved in. The civic leaders who are serving as honorary pallbearers were friends of his. Many of them are prominent business leaders in this community now, but they are people who were just starting out as he was here in the 40s and 50s, and many of them elderly. Some of it is reflective of his University of Michigan roots. The late coach Bo Schembechler was to be one of the honorary pallbearers. He, of course, passed away, so in memoriam he will be a pallbearer, as the program will state. So this is going to be very much a different feeling, reflective of his roots here in Michigan. You're right about his being born in Nebraska, but his mother moved to Grand Rapids a short time after his birth. He went to high school here in Grand Rapids, played high school football, worked in his family's paint company. He was a star of the football team. After law school at Yale, he came back to Grand Rapids, opened a law practice here. This is where he got married to Betty Ford at Grace Episcopal Church. 3 of his children were baptized in that church. He has deep roots here in Michigan. He is the only president from Michigan, and Michigan very much likes to call him their own. Nora?
Janet Shamlin, stay with us, of course, as we watch a plane that looks like, to many people, Air Force One. It is a member of the presidential fleet, one of the 2 747s that is sometimes designated Air Force One, but it's only called Air Force One when the current president is on board. We know that President Bush lent this plane to the Fords, as is customary, so that they could fly the remains of former President Gerald R. Ford to his final resting place in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And so there are many on board this plane, the full and extended family, the kids and the grandkids, as well as former President Carter, some of the pallbearers who will also serve and deliver a eulogy. Former President Carter, I think I mentioned. Bob Greene is with us, of course, the presidential historian and author. Bob, let me ask you, because we're talking about former President Carter, who, of course, defeated Jerry Ford for the presidency. They were not friends during the campaign, but how did they become such close friends?
Well, you know, Nora, that there's that closely knit bond of the former presidents, that little club. It began, as Chris Matthews was saying this morning, with the line in the Carter inaugural address where he thanked Ford, off the cuff, thanked Ford for serving the nation. Ford was completely caught off guard by it and thought that it was just a wonderfully touching moment. So did Betty. That helped heal a lot of wounds of the campaign, that line. From then on in, the president and the former president were in very close contacts as President Ford began to build his presidential library, which is just down the road from the plane, about an hour and a half over in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and his presidential museum. He consulted President Carter on his decision to split the museum and the library. I don't know if everybody knows this, but the presidential museum in Grand Rapids, President Ford, where he's going to be lying in repose, President Ford wanted to give something back to the good people of Grand Rapids and to his alma mater at the University of Michigan. And I believe that he consulted President Carter about that as well. By the time Carter was out of the White House, all had been forgiven.
And Janet Shamlin is also on the scene with us. And Janet, I know you have some more details about the ceremony that will take place. What can you tell us?
Well, it's very reflective of President Ford's background, and we should note, just before landing here at the airport in Grand Rapids that bears his name, the plane carrying the casket of President Ford did a flyover at the University of Michigan football field in Ann Arbor. Those little touches, not unlike his children greeting people at the rotunda yesterday, the signs of a very personal man who still felt connected to his endeavors. He was remained a big Wolverine fan to the end. So they did a flyover, and now they're landing, as you see, at the Grand Rapids International Airport. start. The University of Michigan band from Ann Arbor will play Hail to the Chief. There will be a 21-gun salute. Again, not overly formal, but little touches that reflect this man, his upbringing, where he's been, and the people that he's represented. As you said, Nora, there are a number of family and friends on the plane who are traveling from Washington to here in Michigan, but there is yet another